Welcome to Hotel de Luna. Char. Good morning, everyone. This is Group 2, and today's report will be presented to you by Alulino, Bunyales, Fabre, Faro, Francisco, and Saguran. And our topic would be agency problems and accountability of corporate managers and shareholders. By the end of the lesson, you are expected to first, recall the agency problem, second, enumerate and explain the principal agent specific issues, third, enumerate and elaborate the identified agency problems in corporate governance, fourth, ascertain the significant differences among the types of takeovers, and lastly, show the important roles the external bodies serve to improve corporate governance. But before we properly start this lesson, we'll walk you first on 8 of the most outrageous perks given to the executives in the history of United States.
Mr. Dennis Poloski was convicted of grand larceny for misappropriating millions. $2 million to be exact for his wife's birthday party from shareholders' assets.
Companies are sometimes willing to pay executives a large amount of money for the promise not to compete or disclose any company secrets when they change employers. This is what happened to Shaw Group Company. According to Baton Rouge-based Shaw Group, the company is willing to pay the former CEO James Bernhardt $15 million plus interest in an exchange to keep his promise a little longer than usual, even 2 years after his death.
Tyson Foods was so grateful of Don Tyson's past leadership that the company financed vacations for Tyson and his close friends, paid their personal credit card bills, and allowed him to charge unusual purchases. But what is very questionable was having Tyson company employees clean Mr. Tyson's house and mow his lawn. Tyson Foods even spent $205,675 for having their employees clean 5 different homes owned by Don Tyson, his family, or friends. The company headquartered in Springdale, Ark also sprang $84,000 in lawn maintenance costs for the same 5 homes.
CEO of Quest Communications, Edward Miller, has secured a special deal allowing his wife and daughter to commute all the way from Colorado to California on a corporate jet. It is reported that the phone company expends almost $282,000 that year just for Miller's family joyrides. The personal use of company jets by CEOs is common among American companies, but Miller demanded an exemption in which he included his wife and daughter's access to it.
Occidental Petroleum paid Ray Irani a lump sum of $95 million to buy out his contract and resign the company tax subsidy after years of being an income tax-free employee.
Interim CEO Steve Jobs of Apple Computer had fired a decade ago, but because of his great leadership, directors of the said company offered to cash, but Jobs refused to accept. However, the company gave him a plane and Gulfstream 5 worth $90 million, which is a very good perk. It was reported that the company paid $1.1 million in flight reimbursement for his use.
To say that Larry Ellison is a security conscious is a bit of an understatement. He installed a security system at his expensive Northern California home, where it was reported that Oracle Corporation pays $1.4 million annually in order to monitor it.
Nobody knew what fabulous rates John Welch got from General Electric. The 2012 statement says that he only received $54,019 from giveaways. In 2001, it was $171,772 mainly from financial counseling. This is what only reaches surface, but not with a bitter divorce happened. Welch's ex-wife detailed a multi-million-dollar litany of perks that GE provided. Experts say the resulting uproar is one of the reasons why regulators revamped corporate disclosure rules. Subsequently, Douglas gave out the board of his books.
According to a study by Economic Policy Institute, CEO's compensation has outpaced the average worker's pay by astonishing margin over the past few decades. CEO's compensation grew by a shocking 725% between 1978 and 2011, far outpacing the growth of the stock market. Whereas the average worker's pay has only risen to 5.7% in the same period.
So let's properly start, shall we? So there is an existing argument over corporate social responsibility in the corporate governance. As we know, it is ruled by the shareholders, board of directors, and corporate managers. And each of them has their own idea of running the corporations, and advocates of social responsibility adds up to that. Moreover, this conflict of interest can actually cause the agency problems. When the advocates recommend legal fixes, they typically focus on their aspirations without fully analyzing how the proposals will actually operate in the context of real world constraints on governing large firms. The relevant legal issues for corporate social responsibility concern whether and to what extent legal rules should mandate or restrict mechanisms of corporate governance in order to ensure that corporate managers act in the society's interest rather than those solely of the shareholders. The argument for laws intended to ensure more socially responsible management, but most corporate managers are forced to respond to shareholders' interests and it may not maximize the social welfare. Shareholders care only about the profits in a narrow accounting sense rather than social welfare and take no responsibility for social harm. Advocates of more socially responsible governance actually argue to empower the corporate managers to run their companies with a view to society interests as well as those of shareholders. One response to this argument is society's interests are not as inconsistent with those of shareholders as social responsibility theorists assume. Markets can reflect political and social taste and socially relevant information. Another response concerns the cost of legally compelling socially responsible governance, that is, of reducing managers' accountability to shareholders. But Burl and Means argued 70 years ago that the central problem of corporate governance is that corporate managers are essentially free from effective shareholder discipline. As we recall, Enron and other notorious corporate scandals demonstrate that this agency cost problem has not yet disappeared. Substantially restructuring corporate governance to reduce managers' accountability to shareholders could exacerbate these problems. So they thought if corporate managers should not be made significantly less accountable to shareholders, then the remaining corporate social responsibility issue is whether firms ought to be able to make them more accountable to shareholders. The initial question is whether such a move is feasible. The governance of large corporations is based on the general principle of director primacy, which reposes basic management power in corporate directors. The conventional mechanisms for controlling this power all have significant gaps that inhere in the difficulty of controlling managers' discretion in publicly held firms. One type of accountability mechanisms that might be considered is to weaken the manager's grip on the firm's cash through partnership like devices that mandate distributions and permit dissatisfied owners to cash out. These mechanisms have not been used as tools of public corporation governance, at least partly because the effects of tax make distributions to owners unattractive. Other factors also may play a role, including large firms' need for financing flexibility and the light of changing business needs, which in turn may require that managers decide distribution. In other words, greater managerial accountability to shareholders. And it might be infeasible because it would increase operating costs more than it would reduce the agency costs. If so, it is unnecessary to even reach the issue of whether these mechanisms are actually socially desirable. So, yeah.
Agency problem and corporate governance. Agency theory suggests that the firm can be viewed as a loosely defined contract between the resource providers and the resource controllers. It is a concept that explains the important relationship between the principal and the agent, wherein the principal employ one or more individuals called agent to carry out some service and entrust to them the decision making. To make it simple, the principal is someone who relies heavily to the agent to make the right decision. In terms of business, the principal is considered to be a company shareholders while the agent is considered to be a company executive. Although it seems like it, shareholder and company executive are tightly connected. Each of their actions greatly affect each other. And also, agency theory assumes that the principal and the agent interest is not always an alignment. This is sometimes called to us the principal agent problem. So, when does the agency problem occur? So, when does an agency problem occur? An agency problem occurs when a conflict of interest arises for an agent, a person acting on behalf of another person. The conflict of interest arises when the agent's own interests are different from those of the principal, the person being acted for. In corporate world, a CEO is an agent for the owners of the company, the shareholders. The CEO is hired to act in the shareholders' behalf. If a situation arises when the CEO personnel interests are different from those shareholders' interests, this is an agency problem.
Brain makes an offer to buy SmartCo. The CEO of SmartCo thinks it might be in the shareholders' best interest to let the takeover happen, but he knows the takeover would mean the loss of his job. Instead, he proposes a plan for SmartCo to buy back the majority of its own shares, thus using up its attractive spare cash and raising its stock price. This would discourage the takeover, making it an agency problem. There are 4 avenues to help solve an agency problem between shareholders and management. Agent compensation can be tied directly to benefits for the owners. For example, CEO compensation can be tied to stock price. Stockholders can band together to intervene and make the CEO act correctly. Stockholders can urge the board of directors to fire the CEO. Stockholders can increase their control, take over management, and bring in new managers.
For instance, the shareholder are the principal of the board of directors, and the board of directors, on the other hand, are the principal of the executive, manager, and the auditors. Now, these are the principal agent specific issues. First, diversification versus dividends. Second, managerial opportunism. Third, power supremacy versus technical expertise. Then fourth is trust. Diversification versus dividends. Diversification means branching out into new business opportunities, not just expanding your existing business. The dividends, on the other hand, are cash payments a company makes to its shareholders. This is an issue about how to manage the free cash flows because managers want these funds to be invested in additional product diversification, while the shareholders prefer these funds to be declared as dividends, as it backed by income.
Next are the managerial opportunism. Managerial opportunism involves a manager exploiting opportunities in his own self-interest. Managerial opportunism is one of the symptoms of the agency principal problem, with manager as a agents and the owner as a principals. With the agency principal problem, manager act in their best interest, but not in the best interest of the owners. This managerial opportunism occurs when the agent chooses to use the funds to unrelated diversification and growth, which leads to increase in composition income of the managers and decrease the dividends declared to its shareholders. Power supremacy versus technical expertise. This is an issue when some of the corporate investors are just putting their money with expectation of dividends of the certain time. The nature of their intention made them rely on the expertise of the agent. To sum it up, the agent doing the real things and the principal waiting for the ultimate result. Last but not the least are the trust. Shareholders have more trust than doubts to the agents, and they are entrusting everything as far as operation, including the charting of the corporation future, to its directors and officers. This is another issue because the trust given to the agents will make them comfortable, and that makes them lose their balance, which is also an essential component of managerial opportunism. We have understood and tackled about the first part of this chapter. Now let's move on to the next, where we will enumerate and elaborate about the identified agency problems in corporate governance. Here we have adverse selection, agency cost, conflict of interest, legal requirements versus opportunistic behavior, and lastly, self-interested behavior. First on the list is the adverse selection. The core concept of adverse selection is the insufficiency of information that is normally obtainable to the principals and to the agents. When we say insufficiency of information, it means lack or inaccurate information where it is another identified agency problem in principal-agent relationship. Principal-agent relationship exists between a company's management or the agent and its shareholders or the principal. For the agent, this happens when the agents presented an inaccurate information in the resume to qualify in the job. In the resumes, they have discussed their qualification in interviews, principals screen the agents to be. Most of the information process is actually anchored on the information provided by the agents. Based on the information that was given by the agents, the principals decide whether such agents are accepted or not for the positions. But in some cases, such resumes that contains that information of agents are later found out that it was contained inaccurate information, or the information from the interviews are later documented as not the same as what is desired in real performance or in performing actual tasks or jobs. Insufficient information may also happen or done by the principal, not just by the agents. It is through misrepresentation of information or provide incomplete or half-cooked information. When we say half-cooked, diba, there is something missing or kulang pa to be fully cooked. It needs something that could fill in what is lacked. just as the principal's misrepresentation of information. There is insufficient information that may arise if that is the case. To understand more, let's cite an example po. Say for example, principals in interviewing prospective accountants. They may affirm that high ethical standards are to be maintained in processing as well as in reporting financial information to shareholders. Based on this representation that was given by the principal, agents believe it is something so consistent with their trainings and beliefs. Unfortunately, some of them later found out that what has been said is not really happening. The words of the principal during the initial interview are not supported with actual events. So there we can see that there is insufficient information presented by the principals. So, dili lang yun ang agent ang makakommit ng insufficiency of information, but as well as the principal through misrepresentation of information. The next is the agency cost. It is the resources to be sacrificed that are need or perceived to be closely controlled from the perception of the principal. It is a significant cost in a principal-agent relationship, or in other words, it is an internal expense that comes from an agent taking action on behalf of the principal. Since the principal is delegating power or responsibility, and shareholders want management or the agent to run the company in a certain manner, the principal will carry out some activities that could reassure that the agents in which they take action on behalf of the principal decides in the most favorable to the point of view of the shareholders and increases the shareholders' wealth or value. So, the activities include reports, observation visits, supervision, and third-party assurance like compliance audit, and external financial statement audit. None of the mentioned activities are cost-free. It means it is a cost for a company. However, when the above efforts of the shareholders to alter the managerial behavior are not present, or there will be no activities imposed by the principal for reassurance, there will normally be some loss of shareholders' wealth due to misappropriate managerial behavior or actions. That's why some of shareholders will carry out some activities for assurance that there will be increase in their wealth, since it is one of the tasks, or I could say it is a main task of the agent that was given by the shareholders. On the other hand, agency costs would be excessive if shareholders would attempt to ensure that every managerial action is in accordance with shareholder interest. Additional information, agency cost includes fees associated with managing the needs of conflicting parties are called agency risk. The third one is the conflict of interest. Agency theory pulls an essential problem in organizations, and that is conflict of interest. A corporation's managers can or may have personal objectives that compete with the owner's objective of maximization of shareholders' wealth. Because the shareholders, they authorize the executive or managers to manage the firm's resources, a potential conflict of interest exists between the two groups. So here I will present to you the interest of shareholders and the interest of the management. First is the interest of shareholders. These include increasing earnings per share and current share prices, increasing investor ratios such as dividend per share, and others may include the company improving the corporate social responsibilities or CSR, while the management interest may include managing the firm to achieve its objectives increasing the wealth and size of the company by expanding the company's activities because they believe the bigger the size of the company they manage, the better they are perceived to be. When the conflict of interest with the two groups shareholders' wealth maximization could be subordinated to an assortment of other managerial objectives. So, how to minimize this issue? Managers can be encouraged to take action in the shareholders' interest or shareholders' best interest through incentives, constraints, punishment, and other control mechanisms. For example, reward to management, take over decisions, or maybe it could be punishment or other control mechanism. But these methods are effective only if shareholders can closely monitor all of the actions being undertaken by the managers. However, if close monitoring is invisible, this might lead to a moral danger problem. Moral danger problem is a problem where agents take unobserved actions against the principal's interest because it is impracticable or not achievable for shareholders to monitor all managerial actions performed in the different level in the organizations. To reduce the moral danger problem, shareholders or the principals must incur agency costs to monitor agents' activity. To reduce moral danger problem, the shareholders or the principal must incur agency costs to monitor the manager's activity. Kanina, I have discussed about what is agency cost. It is the resources to be sacrificed that are need or perceived to be closely controlled by the perception of the principal. So yun dapat ang gagawin ng shareholders para monitor ang mga actions that was taken by the managers. So the fourth one is the legal requirement versus opportunistic behavior. The culture of opportunism is manifested by excessively paid executives and managers combined with the financial accounting scandals in U.S. companies presented a very strong reflections of the ineffectiveness of principal-agent relationships. Here na nating natawag na managerial opportunism. Managerial opportunism involves the use of internal company information for the personal benefit of one or more managers. For public companies, managers exercise this opportunism where they choose to sell shares they received as part of their compensations when they perceive the market's value of the company as higher than their estimates of its value. For private companies naman, managers may diversify the business or grow revenues at the expense of profitability to protect their jobs and increase their salaries. So, muna naitabo in the U.S. companies. So, kato, here we can see nga neglect sila sa legal requirements na dapat ilang i-follow. So, from the surge of scandals in the decade prior to 2002, the U.S. Congress enacted the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which imposed a new regulations on public companies and their auditors. Such rules are understood to be effective in making sure that executives do their parts or obligations in doing things expected from them. So, kung unsay mong position in the organization, you should ganang do your part or obligation nimo kung unsa ang gina-expect na buhaton nimo in the company or in the organization. It also protect the principal or the investing public is just one of them. This law not only strengthens the protection of the investors or the shareholders, but also affects the hierarchy of principal-agent relationships. Shareholders are principals of public companies, and their immediate agents are board of directors. And then ang board of directors are principals, their agents are the executives selected to carry out policies, and independent auditors, they engage to audit the financial statement of the company. And then the principal-agent relationship will continue until the lower level of organizations. The last one is the self-interested behavior. Agency theory suggests that in imperfect labor and capital markets, executives and managers will seek to make the most out of their own value at the expense of corporate shareholders. Agents have the capability to operate in their own self-interest rather than in the best interest of the shareholders or of the firm because they have believed nga ang executives and managers know better than shareholders whether they are capable of meeting the shareholders' objectives or not. Another issue, the self-interest nganong ga-arise ni siya in the corporate governance, it is because there are kanang absence of clear and compelling evidences that it is the agents that is at fault or responsible and consequently to be blamed or be crowned on the final outcomes of the organization, positive or negative. So here in self-interested behavior, we can say that agents will take use or take advantage sa ilang knowledge because they have known to be better than shareholders. So by that, they have the capability to operate in their own self-interest rather than the best interest of the firm. But, di gyapon na sila ma-blame kung unsa man gani ang final outcomes sa organization. It is because there are absence of clear and compelling evidences that proves nga na sila'y fault or responsible sila kung unsa man gani ang final outcome sa organization.
Hi everyone, how's your day? It's been a long time without seeing you, my friends. Anyway, for the next topic, I'll be tackling about remedies within shareholders. So first, what is shareholders remedy? So a company shareholders owns a shares in the company, right? But they have no influence over how a business operates in day-to-day. So often, shareholders face neglect or fraud. Accordingly, remedies had been imposed on shareholders by law which give them the legal right to contest the neglect or fraud they experience in the court of law. Proxy voting. So proxy voting is a form of voting whereby some members of a decision-making body may delegate their voting power to other member of the same body to vote in their absence. Also, this refers to an exercise of voting in behalf of shareholders through the use of special authority given by the shareholder or principal. So the one who performs this proxy voting system are called the principal and proxy. So let me give you a clear view kung unsay lahang role. So it is in the same situation but in different context lang. So there's an event in school and there is an attendance. But unfortunately, you won't be able to make it on time. So you call your friend and ask, "Bay, permahis ako dira, bay. Bayaran lang tika karon, ayo lang pasapon." So in that situation, your friend will be the one who is called the proxy, and you will be the one who is called the principal. So unlike in the example that I gave earlier, in a formal settings or in a corporate settings, proxy voting is done formally. So principal and proxy fill up a proxy voting form and a card. Usually, a company held an annual meeting for the directors to discuss things and happenings in the corporations. So in the absence of principal in the annual meeting in a business corporation, proxy being given an authority has the right to vote in all instances. but he has no right to debate or participate in the proceedings. So the following are the areas where proxy system accrues benefits to the principal or shareholders, more especially if the proxy is a fund manager. So it benefited in the routine decisions, governance, and issues on anti-takeover. So although proxy voting system is good, it is not without negative implications. So proxy voting is said to lack deliberative feature due to the limited authority and instructions given by their principal or shareholders. Also, proxies cannot modify their decisions on the deliberation process, a process where strength and weaknesses of the arguments as well as counter-arguments are theoretically tested. So, as what I have said earlier, although proxy has the right to vote, they have no right to interfere or debate in the proceedings. To further deepen our knowledge about proxy voting, let me share to you a short video about proxy voting. So next is derivative suit. So a derivative suit is a lawsuit filed by the shareholder on behalf of the corporation against a third party. So the third party referred here is an insider, such as the directors or the senior managers or senior officers in the company. So derivative suit is unique because usually under corporation law, the management, which is composed of the directors, officers, and senior managers, are responsible or to be partly responsible in bringing and defending of the corporation against the suit. In the case of derivative suit, the stockholders or the shareholders is the one who will initiate the suit in cases where the management has failed to do so. Under the Corporation Code of the Philippines, shareholders are the owner of the corporation. But for some reason, they are not empowered to manage the day-to-day operation and routinary concerns of the corporations. Due to this, shareholders appoint directors, and directors appointed executives and high-rank managers. Derivative suit allows shareholders to bring an action in the name of the corporation against the parties who is causing harm to the corporation. So when the directors, officers, managers, or employees of the corporation are not keen on filing an action, a shareholder may first petition them to do so. If such petition is unsuccessful, the shareholder may do it himself to bring an action on behalf of the corporation. In initiating derivative suit, A shareholder must satisfy requisites to prove that he has strong status before permitted to proceed with the action. The shareholder may be required to meet some qualifications. So one of these qualifications might be the minimum value of his holdings in the corporation and the minimum duration of his being a shareholder. In addition, the shareholder who is about to initiate the action may be required to post a bond or other fees to compensate whenever his action is unsuccessful.
We should clarify you don't own the company anymore.
No.
Tell just briefly what happened. And you're still out there and still associated with it. You're like the ambassador. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Well, the company ended up getting sold.
Right.
Jerry and I struggled to keep it independent, but the company was public at the time, and the way the Security and Exchange Commission laws work is that if some other entity is offering a very high price for the stock, the board of directors is compelled to sell it. So despite our best efforts, the company did get sold. It's no longer owned by us. It's owned by Unilever, and we are technically employees of the company.
You touched on it, that the current business law required you to sell out when you got an offer. What might have changed that?
So one of the changes that's been happening is the beginning of what's known as B corporations, benefit corporations. And those are corporations that are now chartered in probably 30 states around the country and in countries all over the world as well. And when companies voluntarily decide to become a B Corp, they say that part of their purpose is public benefit. They are not simply about return to their shareholders. And it is this wildly growing movement. It is amazingly popular.
So if Ben & Jerry's had been a B Corp back then, you could have resisted the buyout?
I think it's probably one of the steps we could have looked at. It's pretty hard to go back and say, what could we have done? But we certainly did not succeed in staying independent.
Remedies within shareholders. Takeover. Corporate takeover is the general term referring to the transfer of control of a firm from one group of shareholders to another group of shareholders. A takeover is actually a form of transaction kung saan yung company na magti-take over or bidder company ay pwedeng makuha yung target company, meron man o walang mutual agreement between the management of the two companies. Naturally, a larger company states an interest to attain a smaller company. The takeover can be through a friendly acquisition or an unfriendly, hostile, or bid, such as a hostile takeover, with the aim of replacing current existing management is usually attempted through a public tender offer. While hostile takeover will be explained furthermore as we go on with our discussion. 4 types of takeover: friendly takeover, hostile takeover, reverse takeover, and tender offers. First, friendly takeover. Bago maisagawa ang isang takeover, the bidder company usually inform first the board of directors of the target company. Kung sa tingin ng board na accepting the offer assists the shareholders' interest better, or if they believe the price per share offer is reasonable, then they would recommend to the shareholders to accept the said offer. Friendly takeovers is a state in which a target company is willing to be acquired by another company. In closely held or privately held companies, since the shareholders and the board of directors is usually the same people or closely connected with one another, private takeovers are normally friendly. Second, hostile takeover. A hostile takeover is when an acquiring company tries to take over a target company in contradiction or against the wishes of the target company's management. It permits the acquirer to be company to bypass or avoid the target company's management if it is uncooperative and unwilling to agree with the merger or takeover. Two things are to be considered for the takeover to be hostile. First is if the target company board casts off the offer but the acquirer-to-be is persistent to pursue the takeover. Second is if an offer was made without informing the target company's board ahead of time. A hostile takeover can be done in several ways, such as by making a tender offer, kung saan ang acquiring company makes a public offer with the price of which is way higher kaysa sa current market price, making it difficult para sa existing shareholders to not agree with the offer. Another is by engaging into a proxy fight, whereby ang acquiring company gathers enough shareholders. Usually a simple majority is sufficient para palitan ang management with a new one. Itong new management will be installed or put in consciously to accept the takeover. Then lastly is by quietly purchasing enough stock in the open market, also known as creeping. Its purpose is to collect enough holdings na makakaapekto sa mga decisions within the corporation. A 20% shareholding is enough to influence the management. Actually, there are risks involved in hostile takeovers, such as a poison pill in takeover issues. There can also be landmines which can cause problems in the new management. Due to the level of risk involved, banks and other financiers are less willing to back hostile bids. Third, reverse takeover is a type of merger used by private companies to become publicly traded without passing through an initial public offering or IPO. It is where a private company buys enough shares to control a publicly traded one. At this point, the shares floating ay magiging share na ng private company at masasabi natin na ito ay isa ng ganap na publicly traded na kumpanya. Why do reverse takeover? With reverse merger or reverse IPO, the private company has saved itself from paying expensive fees related to an initial public offering. So, going public sa pamamagitan ng reverse takeover enables a privately held company to become publicly held at a lesser cost and with less stock dilution when compared to an initial public offering. However, with reverse takeover, the company cannot acquire additional funds throughout the transaction. So, it is advised to have sufficient funds for the company to finish the deal. Fourth, tender offers. A tender offer is a type of takeover proposal that is public and open invitation or offer, usually coursed through media by a prospective acquirer to all stockholders of the target corporation. The term comes from the fact that they are inviting the existing stockholders to tender or sell their shares to them at a specified price during a specific time. Each share is set at a higher price than the company's current stock price, which benefits the shareholders with a greater incentive to sell their shares. Financing a takeover is an act of funding for the purpose of obtaining control over a corporation through the purchase of stock or any other means. It is the process of providing capital for someone to establish control of another corporation. So, there are several ways to finance a takeover. In financing a takeover, there's debt financing, partial or full equity conversion, and share swap or all-share deal. First, debt financing. In order to complete the merger transaction, a company acquires another to pay a specific amount of money. This money can be raised in a number of ways. While the acquiring company has enough money to finance the transaction, some acquiring companies choose to finance the takeover in other ways, such as it will borrow from a bank or raise the funds needed through the issuance of bonds. This acquisition, which is funded by debt, ay tinatawag na leverage buyouts. The debt will usually be recorded in the balance sheet of the acquired company. The acquired company then has to pay back the debt. Ito ay kadalasang ginagamit ng private equity companies para mabawasan ang impact ng cash flows at the same time. Debt financing could reach as high as 80% of the purchase price, leaving only 20% to be raised internally by the acquiring company. Partial or full equity conversion. This is done by giving the shareholders of the target company offers that include a debt instrument in partial or in full payment of shares. Debt instruments are actually tools an individual, government entity, or business entity can use for the purpose of earning capital. Debt instruments provide capital to an entity that promises to repay the capital over time. This arrangement is attractive than a spot cash transaction from the taxation point of view, since spot cash deals being treated as disposal are open and exposed to taxation, or capital gains tax, which is 6%. This tax exposure is partly protected if transactions will be in the form conversion from equity to debt, which will result for the one shareholders to be a debt investor of the corporation. Share swap or all-share deal. In a takeover, sometimes the transaction can entirely be financed by a share swap or all-share deal, where there will be no money involved. Instead, the bidder company subjects its own new shares to the shareholders of the acquired-to-be or target company. It is also called a stock swap, and during this, each company's share must be precisely valued in order to determine a fair swap ratio between the two shares. Then the acquiring company will end up as the majority shareholder and have the control over the company's crucial issues. The shareholders of the target company, being the minority, may still have significant influence over the merged entities.
A company's stability and profitability are interdependent on its ability to quickly identify and respond to changes in the external environment. In this juncture, we will discuss the external factors affecting the governance, which are the competitors, financiers, regulatory agencies, watchdogs, predator companies, information enhancer, providers, and gatekeepers, investment banks, stock exchanges, and financial press.
So first one is competitors. As we all know, competitors are those corporations or other business entities, either private or public, that is offering the same product or service as your own company. So it affects governance in a way that it interferes in your goal to attract investors. As we all know, investors are interested in companies that have high market share and can guarantee high return. That is why it is so important to create value and competitive edge for the company. Competition makes the corporation on guard on what to do for itself to gain competitive advantage over its competitor, and at the same time, scout for things that would make your competitor at a disadvantage.
Financiers, a term given to a person or entity who manage routinely huge amounts of money. This person or entity involved in the activity of lending money, project financing, large-scale investment, or large-scale investment of money. Examples of financiers are investors and capitalists. Financiers affect company governance in the sense that being the fund provider, financiers once their investment secured, they only invest in companies with good track records. So for those companies who have tainted reputation, it is hard to attract financiers, and no financing means less operations. So the effect of financiers may break or make the company.
Regulatory agencies. These agencies are independent branch of government established by the legislative body. They exercise autonomous authority on areas of corporate activities that involves administrative law regulations. Specifically, they enforce rules and regulation and supervise the corporation for the benefit of the public. Examples are the SEC, DTI, DOST, DENR, and DOH.
Watchdogs refer to independent organizations trying to police a particular industry or corporate conduct to make certain that the activities of these companies are accordance with acceptable standards and existing laws. For example, media, financial institution, human rights advocates, environmental protectors, and many others.
Predator companies, we can compare it to the animalistic predator attacking prey scene where there's a much bigger and stronger animal attacking the weaker ones. The predator companies refers to those corporations that are always on the watch and waiting for a chance to take over a certain company, be it via friendly or hostile takeovers.
Information enhancers, providers, and gatekeepers refers to independent third-party persons or entity whose cooperation is important because they have the capability to at least deter if not prevent misconduct of corporations. Example of gatekeepers are accountants, lawyers, bankers, misconduct analysts, rating agencies, and examiners. They provide information on investment and business concern to investors and fund providers. A good example of gatekeepers' failure is one of the most notorious corporate scandal in the modern times, the Enron scandal. Gatekeepers' role is very important during this time where a number of investors in financial market have increased. Some of these investors are not technically knowledgeable in the field of business, so they will be dependent on information provided by financial gatekeepers. Because of many corporate scandals at the time, U.S. government enacted the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This act regulates the auditing and accounting industries in two ways. It requires a certification from the CEO that the financial statement provided by the company is reliable. Second, this law also increases penalties for corporate fraud and irregularities. It also outlines the cascading responsibilities from the board to other officers and eventually to gatekeepers. In the current Philippine setup, it is a requirement that the company's financial statements, which are filed with the Bureau of Internal Revenue and the Securities of Exchange Commission, be accompanied with a statement of management responsibility.
Investment bankers. Essentially, they act as financial advisors to investors and corporations. They also assist mergers and acquisitions as well as in debt restructuring. But mainly, they are the individual or entity which acts as an agent who review, buy, and sell securities from the issuing companies to the investors. In short, when a corporation issues or sells new securities, the investment banker will review the whereabouts of the security, negotiate for the price, and is responsible for finding buyers of these securities on sale. It is different from any other financial institution in a way that it does not accept deposits and provide loans. So there are three roles that is performed by investment bankers, which is the origination, underwriting, and distribution. So first, origination. It covers the secondary operations of discovery, investigation, and negotiation. So discovery, it is the finding of the potential issues of the securities. Investigation is the testing and analyzing of the investment credit of the potential security issuer, including the inherent reliability of the issue. And negotiation is the determination of the amount, the price, and the terms of the proposed issue. In a nutshell, the primary function of investment banking is the cautious study of the soundness and reliability of the corporation with a view of bringing its securities to the investment market. So next is underwriting or public cash offerings. Underwriting is an agreement with an investment banker whereby the investment banker agrees to buy the entire issue at a set price. The
The banker will then look for buyers from the public at large with a price higher than what they agreed with the issuing company. And that profit is called the underwriter's compensation. So there are two ways for underwriting. First is negotiated underwriting, which is it is a deal through an agreement between the issuing company and the investment banker. Second is the competitive bidding, where issuing company awards the offering to the banker that bids the highest price. In case where large and risky securities issue is involved, the investment bankers pull together to form a syndicate. Syndicate is a temporary union for the purpose of selling securities. And there is a term, originating house, which is given for the one investment banker who is chosen to manage and handle the syndicate. So there are two types of underwriting syndicates. First is divided, where each member has a legal responsibility to sell a portion offering allocated to them. Second is undivided, where each member has a legal responsibility for the unsold securities up to the amount of its percentage of participation, regardless of the number of securities that group has sold. Lastly, distribution, where the marketing happens. Investment banker acts as a professional firm to distribute securities efficiently for the corporation. As investment banker, it is expected that the firm has already established marketing and sales network to distribute the securities. And they offer the security to both the corporation issuing securities and investors buying securities. For corporations, the investment banker offers the exact price guarantee on a certain date for securities to offer. But to the investors, the responsible investment banker offers protection against dangerous securities. Hence, there's a compensation.
Stocks exchange refers to an entity which offers trading services and facilities for stockbrokers and traders to buy and sell shares of stocks and other securities. It also offers services for the issue of redemption of securities as well as other financial instruments, including other arrangements such as the payment of income and dividends. The securities traded on stock exchange include shares issued by the companies, derivatives, pooled investment products, and bonds. For the entity to trade a security on a certain stock exchange, it must be listed on particular stock exchange first. Stock exchange is considered as one of the most vital components of a stock market, as it standardizes investments, and the supply and demand of stock market influence the prices of stocks. The role of stock exchanges is to raise capital, mobilize savings, facilitates growth, distributes profit, improves corporate governance, creates opportunities for small investors, facilitates raising capital for the government, and lastly, indicator of economy. Role of stock exchanges. First, raise capital. For business that lack the resources necessary for growth, selling shares on stock market can provide an infusion of capital, which a company can then use to develop and strengthen organization. So stock exchange offers companies with the facility to raise capital for expansion and other corporate developmental projects by selling shares to the investing public. Second, mobilize savings. When people draw their savings and invest in shares, it leads to a more rational allocation of resources because of funds, which could have been consumed or kept in idle deposits with banks, are mobilized or redirected to promote business activity with benefits for several economic sectors such as agriculture, commerce, and industry, resulting in a stronger economic growth and higher productivity levels and firms. Third, facilitates growth of company. It views acquisition as an opportunity to expand product lines, increase distribution channels, hedge against volatility. It also increases market share or acquire other necessary business assets. A takeover bid or a merger agreement through the stock market is one of the most simplest and most common ways for a company to grow by acquisition or fusion. Fourth, distribute profit. As dividends and stock price increases that may result in capital gains will share in the wealth of profitable businesses. Profit is shared both by ordinary corporate investors who are willing to wait until declaration of dividend takes place, and to those speculative investors who are practically in the real trade of playing with the price. They are the investors who actually in haul and dump business. They buy shares at a certain price and sell these shares when price increases. Fifth, improve corporate governance. By having a wide and varied scope of owners, companies generally tend to improve on their management standards and efficiency in order to satisfy the demands of these shareholders. And the more stringent rules for public corporation imposed by public stock exchange and the government. Consequently, it is alleged that the public companies tend to have better management records than privately held companies. But there are many documented cases of failure of corporate governance in some listed companies. For example, Enron Corporation in 2001, WorldCom in 2002, American International Group or AIG in 2008, Lehman Brothers in 2008, General Motors in 2009, and Satyam Computer Services in 2009. Sixth, creates opportunities for small investors. As opposed to other businesses that require huge capital outlay, investing in shares is open to both large and small stock investors because a person buys the number of shares they can afford. Therefore, the stock exchange provides the opportunity for small investors to own shares of the same companies as large investors. Seventh, facilitates raising capital for the government. Stock exchange is also serving as one of the government's avenue to raise funds through issuances of bonds and other papers the latter guarantees. Funds raised from these issuances will then be used by the government to finance the operation of different departments of the government all the way down to the bureaus, agencies, and LGUs. Debt instruments carry interest. Remember that government only has two main sources of funds, through taxation and from borrowings. 8. Indicator of economy. Stocks exchange the residence of the advanced thinkers of the economy and business. Prices of securities here could rise and fall depending on dictate of the stock market, which traders are on full-time job of reading it advance to their advantage. Increase of securities prices or prices that remain stable is a good indication that the economy in general is stable and growing. On the other hand, the stock exchange is the only facility that can provide information on a daily basis or even on real-time basis about the general behavior of stock market. The ugly head of economic downturn can be spotted right away in the behavior of the market. This can be gleaned from the hard figures in the stock exchange. When there is an impending economic recession, depression, or financial crisis, people don't need to read anything anymore. Stock market figures provide more than enough indications. The stock market behaves ahead of reality, so there is use for technical analysis. For the serious players like businessmen, economists, and stock traders, they see these tendencies or behaviors by analyzing the details derived from the stock exchange data.
Lastly, financial press. It refers to the newspapers, magazines, TV channels, broadcast programs, and other media specializing in financial news and updates. The financial press is important to the overall business sector, specifically on the financial sector, as some companies often publish information in this media. This published information, in turn, will become the basis for some of their investment decisions. It also provides an avenue where the information sources and the information seekers meet.
That would be the end of our report. Thank you for watching and listening.